Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, whatever the case may be. This is Alan Schimmel of DevOps.com, and welcome to another webinar. We are going to be getting started in about 36 seconds to a minute as we allow any late arriving guests to a chance to join in. So before we get started, many of you may have attended our webinars in the past, but if you haven't, we use the GoToWebinar platform, and it's pretty full-featured. It gives you the ability to ask questions within the questions section on the right. Hopefully your GoToWebinar interface is on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can ask questions in there. We have set aside time for questions. We'll talk more about it in a second. There's also a chat area where you can ask questions of panelists or the entire audience, or comment. We are holding questions till the end, but you can write your questions in at any time, and they will stay there until then. We'll, as I said, get started here. Actually, it's about 11:01 Eastern time, so we're going to get going. Just give it another 5 or 10 seconds as I see people are still joining in. I don't. Hopefully, what's a beautiful Wednesday, wherever you are. Okay. All right, let's get started. Hi, this is Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and welcome to another DevOps webinar. Very happy to have our webinar today sponsored by our good friends at Zivia Labs. And today's webinar is Continuous Delivery and DevOps at Rabobank. Very lucky to be joined by a great panel today, and if we can go to the panel slide. First, from Rabobank, Manager of Linux Unix Infrastructure Services, we have Sander Edema. Sander, welcome to DevOps.com webinars.
Thank you.
And joining Sander is a distinguished author at DevOps.com, as well as the VP of Products for Zivia Labs. Great fellow. Always interesting to hear what he has to say. Andrew Phillips. Andrew, welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Alan.
Okay. Before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. And if we can bring up the housekeeping slide.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned to those of you who may have been here earlier, or who came on a little earlier, our GoToWebinar interface does have a section where you can ask your questions. We have set aside time at the end of the webinar for questions, and we hope to try to get to as many of your questions as possible. If we don't get to your question, your particular question, we do give it to our panelists and ask them to give us a written response, which we will post to our page for this webinar on DevOps.com. But my advice to you is don't wait till the end to actually type your question in, because we do them as they come in sort of chronological order. So ask your question early, and it has a better chance of being answered. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available for later playback via YouTube MP4 along with the slides. And it usually takes us 24 to maybe 48 hours to get that up on the site. Links to the slides and the recording, as I said, will be out in 24 to 48 hours. There is a chat section as well, but we do recommend that you use the question section for your questions. With that being said, let me not waste any more time, and I'm going to turn things right over to Andrew. And Andrew, if you want to take it from here.
Yes, thank you very much, Alan, and thanks for everyone who's taking the time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to this presentation, partly because I get to listen to someone who's doing this for real in a very complex environment, which is an incredibly useful and interesting learning experience for us. We have Sander. I'm not going to steal too much of his thunder here. I think the main thing that is so relevant to everybody who's attending about this particular story is that often the words continuous delivery and DevOps, the stories you read about and the blog posts you read about and the books and so on, many of them deal with companies that are way away in the kind of industrial landscape of where you sit. They've got maybe a tech company that's a retail company basically subsisting on a website or whatever. The vast majority of IT happens in existing organizations that have a totally different setup, and that have to deal with things like not just business pressure but regulatory requirements, and how do I go from where I am today with a mix of technologies to this faster, more accelerated future that I keep reading about. And I think that the most important thing we can contribute in this particular education session, if you like, is to show people how companies that are coming from this background are actually doing this. And that's why I think what Sandra is going to talk about is so relevant and so important. I think the other thing is that, one big question specifically that always comes up is like, yeah, great, if you just got a website and then it's great, a couple of pages don't show up, no big deal. We are in an industry where every crash, let's remember the New York Stock Exchange just in recent memory, bad stuff happens when things go down. We have all these audit requirements, we have all these security requirements, we have complicated, long-running change and control processes to try to make this all stay up. Surely there's no way for us to adopt these fully automated pipelines that we keep reading about. And I think, to me, what was very interesting was to hear Sandra talking a bit about how by adopting some of these processes, they've actually managed to improve their capability to meet their audit requirements and their compliance regulations. But as I said, enough about me. Let's hand it over to Sander. Really looking forward to what he has to say.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes. For starters, of course, I'm working at Rabobank as a manager of Linux, Unix, and WebSphere. We're also hosting several appliances, and the main focus of this story is about the WebSphere Java environment. So, and the central theme about the story is the triangle between cost, risk, and time, because that's where everybody is in a squeeze, I think, in our industry as a whole. Okay, first, Rabobank. Who are we? Of course, Rabobank is a corporation. We're an organization which has members, and we don't have shareholders. This means that we're not aiming for optimized shareholder value, but that we're actually investing in society, and therefore we're not we have a different goal than many other banks. The result of this is that we used to be the only AAA rated bank within the world that was not in government hands. Unfortunately, due to the mortgage crisis, that all changed, but we're still one of the most solvable banks in the world. So we have agricultural roots. It started with a few farmers who wanted to help each other when crops went down or whatever. So we are, within the Netherlands, one of the largest IT organizations. We have 3,500 plus IT employees. That's our own personnel. We also do a lot of outsourcing, which is about 1,000 people in India. And if you look at our volume, then the Windows Linux IAX volumes are pretty large. We next to this, we also have ZOS and Nonstop, which is out of scope in this story, of course. Yeah. So around 700 Java EE app servers. These are the focus of our story. We have a challenge. We need to change them fast. And there's a reason for it. And normally, if I'm giving this presentation, then my usual question would be, who has been inside a bank in the last month? And around 10% will raise his hand of the total audience. If I start the following question, ask the following question, who's been inside the bank for something else than a mortgage? Then you see that all the hands are going down again, because people only tend to go to a bank for the more complex products or the products where they need to give their signature real life. If you look at this in time, then you see that where the visits to our offices has dramatically decreased, our online contact moments with the amount of contacts with our customers have increased a lot, and it's about a tenfold if you look at today, where the availability of mobile banking on every device leads to everybody checking its account for about well, once a week or twice a week. This is a lot more than used to be. But on the other hand, we're closing offices by the dozen because nobody's coming there anymore. So everything is available online. If I look at Google Wallet is now insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporations, which means it's just a bank. It's a payments accredited payment engine. Lending, billing, payment, everything, if you look at it, it's all there. And it's all in the cloud. And if you see how Apple introduced iPay and became, within 1 week, America's largest mobile payment service provider, then you see time to market we can only dream about. If we want to follow, we need to change. And for our customers, they're expecting these online services. So we need to bring everything online, which means that if you want a mortgage at Rabobank, tomorrow you won't be needing to give your signature in real life, but we're using the digital signing, which is for something in banking, something that tends to legislation needing to being changed. So our goal, by the end of 2016, we want to have almost all our services virtualized, online, available for everyone who's needed. And that's not only the payment, but it's all our services. Also replacing your pass, getting your credits done, whatever, everything you need. On the other hand, given all the crises, banking crises we encountered the last decade, we need to reduce costs in order to mitigate our risk. The European Central Bank wants us to, we need to, and this means that we don't have the amount of money we used to have to innovate, to develop new functionality, and so we need to be creative. Our customer, on the other hand, expects a service which is available on his smartphone to be there all the time. Service disruption is not accepted. Where we had a downtime 5 years ago of one of our data centers and nobody cared about it. Now, if we have a downtime of our payment engine or Ideal engine for like 5 seconds, Twitter is starting to roar. And if we want to follow, we need time to market. It must improve dramatically because otherwise, yeah, we can't follow Apple on the scale that they are able to. So we need to change, be creative, and change the way of thinking. Well, in comes continuous delivery in DevOps. If you look at our organization in the last 5 to 7 years, then we started with Agile development. We started by changing the way we work. After that, we implemented continuous integration, continuous delivery, and now we're growing to the DevOps as it's being defined or described within on the internet or by the experts. Problem is, DevOps itself doesn't have a fixed definition. It's more like a set of things you see and you can say it's DevOps. So at the bottom, we started Agile by putting people together, working in fixed sprints, and changing our conversation from scope, so what can I get for $10, to what do you want? So time and funding is fixed now. And now our stories, our conversations, discussions, and our whole mindset is about what can we deliver in the next 4 weeks. and how can we bring as much value in the next 4 weeks as our customers are expecting. This means that we need to trust our specialists who are working on every day on the code, on the applications, on the maintenance of the applications, and with our customers to specify what is needed. So it's not about command and control anymore. It's about responsibility, ownership, and trusting your people and the team to deliver. The last thing about our agile way of working is, of course, we're not using the waterfall anymore and delivering in about half a year. We're delivering every 4 weeks. Problem was going live every 4 weeks was not. We were not able to do that yet because we didn't have the means. So this is agile. This is a picture you can find on the internet everywhere. If you look at our process and you see how we grew with our agile way of working, then the first complaint that arrived was, well, we're delivering every 4 weeks, but we can't deliver in production because there's too much administration for change management. There's too much manual configuration of our environments, and all scripts are stateful, which means that if they work in your dev environment, they're not working in your production environment. The result was 2 releases a year, although we delivered the code every 4 weeks. The effect of releasing twice a year is that we had a high risk and impact of every release. Example, our CRM go lives used to have 70 projects deploying in production at the same time, which is something from a governance perspective you would not want. So the normal reaction would be, if it's riskful, don't do it, or do it as few as possible. We needed to learn to change this way of thinking. We needed to do it more in order to create routine and to become a master in the process. To be able to deliver more often, we needed to optimize our process. So in comes continuous integration, in which we automated the process from delivering code to creating a build, versionizing both the code and the build, and deploying our software on our servers. We used Excel deploy, and it helped us to make the deployment mechanism for test the same as for acceptance, product, and pre-production. It was a stateless environment, which means that if I want to add another environment for deployment, I can just use the same process and it will have the same effect. The only problem is that the environments might differ slightly, and therefore we're not a blank canvas, and it wasn't predictable what the application would do. So our present, the process is always the same, which I said, deployment is always the same. It's push button, deliver our application and the configuration of the infra for the application by the push of a button. The software is placed in the process. So if the process is always the same, you don't need to discuss the process anymore, because that's effort you put in the wrong place. It's not creating value. Make the process a fixed process and focus your attention on the code and on your software. There's almost no written documentation. There is documentation about what's the new feature, how could our customer use it or whatever, but everything else is in the code. Even the documentation itself is in the code. If you change the code, you change the documentation. And there's no manual processes. So which means this process is standardized. And if I can do it on one environment, I can do it on the rest. So that's nice. But I still don't, it's still just putting a stamp on an environment and stamping the application on it, and I'm done. But I'm not aware of how good I am at it. I don't have any knowledge about the time to market, and there's no way of, well, I'm not in control yet. So what we are building now, and what we already realized at one of our environments, is repeatable infrastructure. If I define it in a stateless way, I can create a blank canvas for the application, which is pre-configured for that specific application. And it doesn't matter if it's in development, test, or production. So I have repeatable application deployment, of course. Then, if I can create environments on a repeatable basis, and I can deploy on a repeatable basis, then I can transport my code, my builds, but through the pipeline to production. This is nice because then it's more like a real pipeline, and there you can create flow. The last one, I want knowledge. We want knowledge. So if the test is not going well, then I want to know where it broke, who created the code, if it's happening more often, what our time to market is, how many iterations we have until we reach production, where time to market is better, and in which project they're doing what to improve the time to market, in order to learn, not to judge, but to learn. So if we have a colleague who delivers a lot of code which fails a lot, we know we can help him. If we have a colleague who creates a lot of good code, we know he can help the other colleague. On the other hand, if code doesn't break a lot, then perhaps we should improve our tests. So feedback is necessary to create learning environment. So what we're doing now is we're creating one standard. It's one pipeline for Java. If the test itself is different per application, front end may slightly different from back end applications, but but the process is the same, and the process is automated. So this is where we're now, and what's delivered in the near future. This is how we're doing it. So we have a source control environment, which is Stash, with Atlassian Git, and we're creating builds in Jenkins, and we're storing them in Maven and Nexus, and from there we use Excel release to transport our builds to our tests and to our acceptance environment, load and stress test environment, and in the end to production. And in order to give feedback, we're using Splunk, in which we are at this moment creating a dashboard in which we can see our funnel. So how many lines of code can be delivered in production within 4 weeks, and how many business functionality is that? How much business functionality, how many story points are released every 4 weeks, so we can learn again. So this is what we're building now. What it delivers for us is less waste. We're not putting effort in the process anymore. We're just building the process once. We're improving the process based on learning, on the feedback loop, but we're not everyone inventing our own process. The effect: lower cost, less waste, better automation due to the fact that we only have to automate on one process and one set of tools, and therefore better time to market. All our waiting time could be reduced. So what it also delivered is and this is something that's from a banking and the highly regulated environment as a bank is very much appreciated. It gives us traceability. So if go back to the previous slide, then we can audit what is in production and explain which road all the code went, and we can guarantee that the code we accepted, the build we accepted to go to production is actually the build that's live and the application that's live. So we can also guarantee that all the checks and balances were there to prevent that malicious code is brought live. So that's traceability and SOX compliancy from software control and distribution perspective. We have a nice explicit separation of responsibilities, which means that there's no gray area between people, which is then a good basis for cooperation, because you know what you can do, what your responsibility is, you know what your colleague is, and what his or her responsibility is, and from there you can support each other, improve each other's results, and help each other. So this is better cooperation and elimination of human error, which is, again, if it's predictable, you can create the error in your development environment or your test environment. If once you see it, you get the feedback, you can improve, and you don't need to have an error in production anymore. So this is for what's in it for us, and it's major. The issues that need attention when implementing a thing like this, it's all about change management. The whole mindset of everyone in the organization needs to change. First, we need to think in products and results and not in processes anymore, because the process is fixed. We need to trust each other and to change the way we bring things live. We need to agree that documentation is not necessarily the best way to go. Documentation is needed, but not like stacks of papers that nobody reads and that are, well, obsolete at the moment somebody's finished it. And well, this is something that just takes time. Onboarding is an investment in quality. This sounds like a no-brainer, but an investment in quality means it costs time, and it means you need to think if you have the time at this moment. We know you will go faster as if you once you're onboarded, but in the time you're onboarding, you're almost standing still. There's a lot of discussion. There's not a lot of change management needed, and well, there's time needed that you can't spend on your code. Automating is letting go. It means that you need to trust your colleague that he's allowed to do the same thing you did before, because it's repeatable. It's repeatable infrastructure, repeatable application deployment. There's version management on everything. So if it goes wrong, you can roll back or roll forward, and it doesn't matter. So that means that if you see the picture of the foot with a bullet in it, it's a Dutch saying that somebody can shoot himself in the foot. It's not a wise thing to do. It hurts a lot, but it won't kill you. So for my people, they needed to allow the application departments to shoot themselves in their foot as many times as needed in order to learn. If you're not making mistakes, you won't learn a lot. So going live requires faith and courage, and therefore support of our the higher management. If you want to go live every 2 hours or every 2 days, then we need to trust on the process. The funny thing is, if you want to go live every 2 days, you need to automate everything. Otherwise, it just takes too much time, and it helps you to eliminate all the mistakes in development environment. So, in an automated environment, you need another type of IT specialist. I discovered that just administrators are not the kind of guys you need. Everything is code. The infrastructure my department delivers is code. The infrastructure of the application is managed in another way. If we want to improve, we need to think in pipelines, not in an instant in production. It's a different way of working. So, and you need therefore personnel that is able to think in concepts and conceptual improvements. So repeatability is a key feature. Well, I said that already. Everybody should be allowed to shoot himself in the foot as many times as possible, or as wished for. As long as people learn, it's a thing. It's nice. Quantitative benefits. This is from one project. And it's only the implementation of what we have right now, which is application deployment and automation through the build server Jenkins. The implementation we realized with Excel release is, I don't have the figures yet. This is from one application. So we have 1,288 hours, which is almost one full-time equivalent of a person. And we didn't calculate the preparation time, the time needed for documenting and making the cookbook of going live, which adds up to around a full-time equivalent. Figure we have around 100 projects, all having the same potential benefits. So there's a lot to gain here. We have more control, we have less. We need less time. We are better in improving, and we're improving every day again because it's the feedback loop is there. Our ambition. Well, we would like to expand on our log management functionality to and therefore increase the ability to learn. Because if we're able to learn, we become more efficient, better in control, and well, in the end, it helps us to gain our competitive benefit. We want a close link from code commit to application deployment. It's there for one, but I want it as a generic service. So it means that if one developer commits code, it should be ready for production, because if it goes successfully through all our tests, it will go live automatically. This is what we would like. Probably we will always have a green button for somebody responsible saying it has been tested the right way, this is the right time, go live now. But in theory, we would like to be able to do it all the way in an automated way. So ambition is expand to .NET, expand to Power Center and Oracle middleware, and even Siebel CRM if we're able to. So this is something we're working on, but also for Siebel CRM needs work. What we've planned: deployment triggers new virtual infra. At this moment, we have for one environment that we can give on-demand tailored infrastructure on a standardized basis, but at this moment we're developing a generic service for it where we can deliver tailor-made definitions of applications within minutes, and it's something that's necessary for time to market, but also for cost, because every virtual machine that I'm running is costing me money. So we want to be able to deliver to an external cloud provider, because we want to don't want to pay for x86 hardware if we can take it for 10 cents in the cloud for the period of a week. So my dream is fully automated pipeline, which means a developer, if we start a project, we have a place, a source repository for code, for infra configuration, and for test code. And we supply our developers and test personnel with interfaces to their tools. So from the code, the environments will be managed. It's because it's just a part of the software configuration, so why not? That also means no accounts on our infrastructure. Nobody logging in anymore because all the data is in our feedback loop, and the deployment mechanism and the pipeline are fully automated. This will take some time though, so I'll give it a year and I hope we're there, but it's a lot of discussion because it's all about having faith and also believing that it will work. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sander. That was, well, I think fascinating stuff, and I have to say, obviously, I had the benefit of having a bit of a sneak preview of what Sander was going to talk about. It's Andrew Phillips here again. Some of the things that especially stood out for me going through this material, and I think they're incredibly relevant to the challenges a lot of our users and customers are facing, but I'm sure a lot of you in the audience as well, is first of all, can I have some kind of confidence that I will get benefit out of this even if I don't go straight to the end? Sander finished talking about his dream, and it's clear that that blog post that you read about Etsy deploying 5 trillion times a millisecond, you don't have to get all the way there in order to get significant benefits out of getting started with these initiatives. But of course, there's no free lunch, as Sander pointed out very honestly and truthfully. This takes some initial time, right? This doesn't just happen, okay, well, we'll take half an hour every day at the end of the lunch break and sort of make this happen. There has to be some kind of buy-in for this, but the more demonstrated proof there is that this can work, and it can work in environments that look quite a lot like yours, I think the better the case becomes for you to take that, as something that we have confidence that we can get this done. I had a discussion with Sander a little bit earlier, and maybe he will touch on that in the questions or so about what the structure is around who's the owner of this initiative, what is required in terms of executive buy-in or sponsorship in order to make this happen. And clearly, if you want to do this broadly and at that level, certainly in that kind of environment, I think we know that nowadays that some level of executive sponsorship is required. You can start these things small, 5 motivated people in that Tiger team with a couple of servers. They found somewhere, but once you start to make this big and you start to touch some of the more business critical applications, there has to be buy-in that this is worthwhile. I don't want to steal too much time here from the questions because I'd really like to get into some kind of discussion, but a couple more things that jumped out at me that I think are very relevant. The principles behind CD and DevOps don't just work for that Heroku marketing web app, whatever that you wrote. There's Sander mentioned some technologies that really count as heavyweight, big enterprise stuff, and I think there's been a tendency in the past to sort of pretend that they don't exist. Oh, let's do DevOps with the microservice stuff over there that we're building brand new, and we can take 10,000 new frameworks off the shelf, and we won't have any of these problems of reality. And of course, guess what? I had a discussion with Gene Kim about this recently, like DevOps in the dark corners is real, right? In order that new microservice, that shiny thing that you're building, eventually it will come back and it will call your mainframe. There's no way around this. So you have to, in terms of the scope of what you're going to address, you have to bear in mind that this will touch things like Power Center, Oracle middleware, your legacy or enterprise or whatever you want to call them, Java stacks, your .NET stuff, not just new shiny stuff. And to see demonstrated proof that these principles can be applied to those kinds of stacks, and it works really well. You can do this with existing applications, and it delivers really significant benefits, I think is very motivating, comforting, however you want to put it. And yeah, I think just one final thing, that the notion that this is all that everybody says, faster, better, cheaper. That's it. Who would say no to that kind of story? Well, obviously, nobody would. But people, what do I do now? And I think that Sanders talked about some very interesting and concrete points about where you get started and which particular technical challenges you need to address. Like deployment's good, then you need to think about your environment, because even if your deployments are repeatable, if they're on a shifting sand environment, that won't be great. And then you move beyond that. You take away access to those environments by making them all versioned and repeatable, et cetera, et cetera. Back to the point where you have that, that dream goal, that fully automated pipeline. And now I'll do the sort of 2 minutes about why, of course, what we try to do, helping with that. For those of you who are not familiar with our technologies, Sandra mentioned 2 of them. I'll briefly sketch them out. There's plenty more information, obviously, out on our site. We're very happy to give you as many demos and discussions as you'd like if you'd like to learn more about them. So XR Release is our kind of end-to-end pipeline orchestrator that Sandra was mentioning as the thing that allows you to look at all the work that needs to be done from the moment that you've completed development all the way through to when your code is actually live. And of course, there's a bunch of orchestrators out there, but what we think is kind of unique, or what we try to enable with this tool, is that you can get started with whatever process you have today. And the reality in most organizations is that certainly as you get towards that last mile, that like bit towards production, not everything is automated yet. You need to interface not just to the technical tools, but also to the process layer, your change management tooling, service or incident management tooling, and all that kind of stuff. And the people that go with that, the project managers to the extent that they still exist, maybe your business users, you need to have an interface that is relevant for them. And we obviously, we dog food our own tools, so we run our own product releases through XR Release. And the reality is, yeah, of course, we have the same goals. We want to push every commit out to some area where you could download it. But as Sandra said, documentation, we want to write release notes, we want to write updates, blog posts. So there's always still some manual component. And rather than pretending that that component doesn't exist and sort of tracking that in an Excel spreadsheet that we sort of secretly keep shamefully, we actually make it part of our pipeline because it's real, it's in there. We need to know, we need to have feedback. If it turns out that publishing that blog post is the thing that always holds up our release, then we have the data that allows us to say, okay, we have to go fix it. Either we get rid of it, or we find a way to do it better, or whatever it is. XL Deploy, well, Sandra already mentioned that. That's the deployment thing. That's like, you have applications, probably a ton of them. You have a lot of different target platforms, whether it's the Javas, the .NETs, the Power Centers, the Informaticas, some big data tooling. So not just web apps, but all the stuff that you have running in your environment. You need one consistent way, or maybe you don't need, but it's certainly very advantageous to have one consistent way to package and deploy your applications out to that enormous diversity of target systems. Because then you only need to think about one reporting model, one audit trail, one security control setup, all those overarching concerns that cut across all those different technologies. You don't want to have to reinvent that wheel all the time with every different technology. So what we try to do there, give you that capability with one tool that has that platform interface between your apps and where they need to run. And the last one is test view, so I'll just spend a quick minute on that. Sander wasn't talking about that. Really, what we've seen, but he did talk about the notion of quality and feedback as being central to the continuous process. And we obviously believe in that very strongly. And so to some extent, we've been a bit surprised by the fact that a lot of the discussion around DevOps and CD tooling focuses very much on the automation side of things, like how can I spin up servers automatically, how can I run containers automatically, whatever it is, and not so much on how do I get feedback out of this running system as effectively and efficiently as possible, because without that information, that quality data, you can't really make a confident decision about whether to go live or not. And then in the worst case, you get a Knight Capital or a New York Stock Exchange, and of course, that has tremendous negative impact on your ability to do CD, because then people go back in their bunker and say, oh no, we need to introduce these big processes to prevent bad stuff from ever happening. And so we'll have like 3 weeks of manual whatever testing, and you're back to the increased risk of trying to deploy everything at once. So quality really needs to be a central element in your thinking, of your planning of the process. And yeah, the more quality data you have, the better, obviously. The challenge becomes a little bit, the more test tools you have, because that's really what quality boils down to, the harder it becomes to aggregate all this data together. So just in the same way Sander was talking about Splunk as giving you that essential information about what your systems are doing at that level, and obviously what does Splunk do? It aggregates all that data no matter where it's coming from, gives it to you in one single pane of glass. Excel Test View does the same for all your test results. So we don't care where the test results are coming from, Selenium, Gatling, Fitnessa, Cucumber, there's a trillion tools out there. This is about bringing the data together and showing it to you in a way that you can configure and that makes sense for whatever you need to, whatever questions you need to answer. So that ultimately when you hit that big green button that Sander was talking about, do we go live or do we not go live, you have confidence that you're getting it right. Okay, enough about that, enough about me and us. Let's open it up to questions. I'm really looking forward to continuing this discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. And you know what, Sander, thank you. Just real quickly, because we have a lot of questions here. But the insight into banking, and because people always say, oh, DevOps is great for startups or great for Google and Facebook, but does it help, organizations that have compliance issues that are, in the finance sector, and understanding how banking today, that it's moving to the web, it's moving to mobile applications, the branches themselves are being shuttered down, and how you guys are accomplishing this using DevOps is just a huge. We don't get that kind of insight, so thank you so much. Let's get to some questions though. So first question here is, what is the role project managers are playing in your model, Sanders, and are they helping create and maintain the feedback metrics? How do they collaborate with Scrum Masters?
Well, the role of the project manager is changing, where before it would be the first person you talk to if you want to speak about the content of the project. It's now the Scrum Master, and the project manager is mainly responsible for having the right people and the right amount of people in the project, having the processes running, and facilitating everyone that the whole Scrum way of working is doing a right job. It's gaining value. So it's much different than before.
Okay. And just a quick reminder, folks, there is the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and if you do have questions, you can put them in there. We will try to get to them, or we'll try to respond in writing after the fact. Next question, and this probably can be an Andrew question as well, is did you have to transition from a blame culture in order to allow for learning and mistakes?
Who to go first? Sander, maybe you first?
Yeah, it's something we're still struggling with. It's difficult. Yes, we need to go from a blaming culture to a learning culture, but it's very easy to blame. So this is something we're working on, and the surprising thing is feedback helps, because if you know if there's optimal transparency, then you can have the conversation about it. But then there's a very important role for the managers to facilitate the process and facilitating the migration to learning instead of blaming.
And I think maybe just to add to that, I think an interesting story that Gary Groover, the guy who did you may know from the HP transformation, like the famous, their software thing that features in the Lean Enterprise book very strongly. He told an interesting story about one of the things about feedback being, blame is, well, obviously it's very common if things fail a lot, right? Because then you're under pressure, and then so the tendency is not to figure out how to dig yourself out of the hole, but to try to make sure you're not stuck at the bottom of the hole. But I think one of the things that he was pointing out is that what fast feedback especially does is it allows you to localize smaller errors that people don't feel that ashamed about, right? There's a difference between pointing out that your commit broke the code in the dev environment, and if, we all know from teaching children, right, or animals or whatever, you have to give the feedback quickly. There's no point waiting 6 months until everything blows up in production and then saying, okay, so the dev team clearly screwed up because the code broke. That's
Yeah.
an incredibly broad blame. I mean, there's no way you can go to one particular person and say, look, I think you made a bad commit. How do we fix this for next time? Because you don't know who did it. So the blame gets sort of spread incredibly broadly. And if you have a fast feedback cycle, you catch problems earlier, so there's less of a need to go and like hang somebody out to dry. Plus, you're quote unquote blaming, you're trying to learn about a smaller problem. So it's also less of a like, okay, well, you're going to be fired right now because you made a bad commit. Well, it doesn't happen. And so I think that teaching, in the same way as you reduce risk by delivering less and doing that more frequently, you can also reduce blame by breaking smaller bits and doing that more often.
Yeah, break fast, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So you want to have the first test to be as discriminative as possible in order to know where the problem is as fast as possible.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Agreed. Good to know. Okay. Next question is, can you share more about how you were able to satisfy your regulatory requirements while doing continuous delivery?
Yeah, of course. Well, the main subject is software control and distribution, which is being able to guarantee that the code that's running in your live production environment is actually the code that you intended to be there. So you can only guarantee that it's the right code if you know how the code came there, how we were able to deploy the software. So if you have manual steps in your deployment process, the first moment, the first manual action makes it confused. You don't know anymore. You can't guarantee that the person that's logged in did something wrong or did something malicious, something you didn't want to happen. So therefore, by closing the loop between our source repository, our build server, and our deployment mechanism, you can guarantee that the code, that the build you brought live consisted of code you approved of.
Got it. Excellent. What about database releases? How do you recommend these are released in a continuous way?
A new version of a database?
I think that's what they mean. Yeah.
Or do you mean application? An application with a database facility? Yeah. Because in the last one you can use at this moment transaction log to roll back, and before we also used previously Oracle snapshots for rollback. So if something went wrong, we could go back to the snapshot. And the situation now is we can just push the button, roll back, and Excel deploy manages for us.
That makes it easy.
Yeah.
Just a quick reminder, the slides and the audio, actually the entire presentation, will be available within 24 hours via MP4. It'll be on DevOps.com, and then separately the slides as well, though the MP4 includes slides. Next question. This approach clearly needs a lot of buy-ins from various levels in the corporate hierarchy. You bet. Did you encounter various levels of resistance? Did you encounter various levels of resistance along the way? For example, some form of why changing something that has been working for the past 10, 20, 30 years? If so, how did you work your way through?
Oh, with a lot of effort and problems and struggling, to be honest. The thing is, our CIO really believes in DevOps now. So since a few months, everything has become a lot easier. We have a Java guild. Well, Spotify is calling it a guild, but in Dutch it's called a vakgroep. And those are now allowed to decide what our pipeline should look like. So which tools should be there, who should be able to do what, and this is something new. Before, I had one application owner who said, I have a problem, can you help me? Yes, I could, of course, but let me buy application deployment mechanism for you. And from that single project, we expanded to a next one where a project manager was who totally believed in continuous delivery and who was willing to invest time from his project to improve. And then from there on, we just were like telling the story, and it's just selling internally selling the product until our CIO well started to become interested in DevOps. So it really takes a lot of effort, or you need to have one person high in management who believes in the subject.
Okay, that's very true, and this is a subject that we've actually dealt with on other webinars and ones we've written stories about here at DevOps.com, and that is, how do you do DevOps? Is it top down, bottom up? It's a little of both, and how do you get executive sponsorship for it? And I think the answer is it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without some stops and starts, and you need to build on successes. And I imagine, Sander, that's kind of what your experience has been from hearing what you went through.
Yeah, and in the end, the most effective way was just inviting an expert who was working with our methodology and just show it. Take the tool, show how a deployment works, and show how the pipeline from code to production, how easy it can be if you're able to standardize and automate. So make it easy.
Alan, if I can also just jump in here briefly before.
Sure.
I think that one of the things that, of course, you mentioned at the beginning, or Sander said it as well, there's just, we're now in DevOps means everything to all people, right? It's the new cloud from a terminology perspective. So it can also be a challenging label to stick on something, because it's like, so what are you trying to do here? The reality ultimately is that the real initiative is called speed stuff up without breaking everything, right? And whatever you call it, I don't think makes that much difference. The problem is, well, very few people are going to disagree that speeding stuff up is a good idea. That's not always true. I have been in some discussions that surprised me at first as well, where people did indeed candidly say, nope, we release twice a year. We can't go any faster than that anyway, because our customers won't do it or whatever. And the reality is, yes, this is not a silver bullet. If you don't have a need to do it, if there's no driver to do it, you're not going to get it off the ground, especially if things are working reasonably well. The fact of the matter is, most companies do have a driver somewhere, and it's ultimately just a question of, are you going to be a little bit proactive about this, whether that's in the context of an individual project, which you really need to get out of the door, or whether that's, as Rabobank is doing, look at the way the market is developing, and stuff is going to happen whether Rabobank does anything or not. So, you can wait and wait for your competitors. And there was an interesting data point. This is the last thing I'm going to say on this. I think 10 years ago, the cost of starting a tech startup to compete with anyone was about $5 million. The cost today is $5,000. So I don't have the exact statistics behind that, but if you think about that, like a factor of 1,000 decrease in the difficulty in competing with your business. If that doesn't persuade somebody at the strategic level to think, okay, well, if we're in a challenge, in a market where we can be challenged, there's many more people who can challenge us today, then I don't know what will.
Agreed. Andrew, and that's very much true today. I mean, it used to be that a software company would cost $40 million, and today you can get a SaaS out the door at a fraction of the cost. We have time for one more question, and we're going to need a quick answer on it, but it's what makes CD projects successful? Mindset, collaboration, or rather tools and framework? Andrew, I'm going to let you go first, and then I'm going to give Sander the last word.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick on this. I mean, of course, ignoring my bias, I think Gary Gruber in his book gets it about right. It's somewhere between 70-30 to 60-40 for process culture versus the tooling. I mean, the tooling it's not so much the tooling that drives it, it's more that ultimately acceleration requires removal of slow processes, and you need to have reliable things in its place. So automation is somewhat a given, because there's very few ways of doing this without automation. But the thing that makes that tooling successful and that gives you that level of visibility and ultimately confidence that we can use the tooling to its full potential, that's a people process thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just real quickly, Gary Groover does have a new book coming out on IT Revolution Press, and we should be on the lookout for it. Sandra, what about you?
Well, I actually totally agree. So the tools is just a necessity in order to work and deliver faster. It's not that, well, we have the tools, let's make it successful, and we don't change the way we work. It's culture, it's mindset, it's the team that makes it a success, and you need automation for it. And fortunately, there's companies like CBI Labs who deliver tools that assist, but it's always the teams.
Excellent. Guys, we're 1 minute over, so we're going to have to call it a wrap. Andrew Phillips, thank you so much for your articles on DevOps.com, for participating in today's call, for all you do in the DevOps community. Sander Edema of Rabobank, thank you for this incredible insight into a real-world example of how banks are using continuous delivery in DevOps. And to our listeners, thank you for joining. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Thank you and have a great day.